Hi everyone and welcome to the final session of your Wellbeing course. So last week we thought about how you manage your emotions by planning ahead for difficult situations. I introduced you to how to use a pros and cons list in a very slightly different way, just so that you can evaluate your current coping strategies compared to new, more helpful ways of coping. You're provided with some information on how to look after your body by looking after your mind, and you were encouraged to think about some small lifestyle changes that you could make that would just support your mental health and well-being. And then finally, we looked at the improve skills to think about how you can manage distress by trying to improve the moment in some way. In today's session, we're going to look at how you can manage your emotions by acting in the opposite way to how your feelings, body and urges are telling you to behave. We'll look at managing high, intense levels of distress. And finally, we'll explore how to develop acceptance of situations that you feel are out of your control. As today is also the final session, I'm going to offer a space for some feedback and provide some information about where you can go from here. So I'll put the learning outcomes for today's session on the screen now. Please take a moment to go through these so that you know what to expect from today's content. So the final managing emotions skill that we're going to look at is called opposite action. And this skill is really useful in reducing really intense emotions. So what we've found is that most emotions have some kind of action urge, which means that our bodies and our feelings make us want to behave in a particular way. And often they have a really useful purpose. So if you think about fear and anxiety, the action urge that often comes with that is to avoid or to run away. And the purpose of that is to keep us safe in dangerous situations. However, if we're not in a situation where there's danger or something to actually be scared of, then that urge of avoiding or running away actually limits our life quite a lot, because we avoid doing things that might actually be fun. We avoid doing things that might actually be good for us. So this skill is really useful if the emotion doesn't seem to fit with the situation. So for example, if you're feeling really scared or worried to go somewhere that is safe, then that there isn't any danger. It's also really useful if acting on the urge was to make the situation worse, whether that's in the short term or in the long term. So a typical response or urge to anxiety is to avoid, but actually in the long term that's just going to maintain those worries and those fears. The typical urge for anger is to shout or to argue, but actually that might damage relationships. So this is where opposite action comes in, and trying to respond in the opposite way to how your emotions and your body is almost telling you to behave in that situation. I want you to take a moment just to think about some of the typical emotions that we experience and what some of the urges to respond to that emotion might be. Once you've come up with some ideas, offer some suggestions on the Padlet and Facebook. I wanted to highlight that it's completely natural to have these urges to respond in particular ways to emotions, because actually we have that sense that it's going to make things better, we have that sense that it's going to relieve those emotions, and in the short term it often does. So if you think about if you're anxious and you avoid something, that anxiety goes away because you don't face it. If you're feeling depressed and you hide away in bed, you often feel better because you're not facing the things that feel really tough to face. So it's completely natural to have these urges and to want to act on them. And this is why this skill can be quite difficult, because it actually takes some conscious effort and some hard work to act in the opposite way to how our body is telling us to respond. So as I've mentioned, this skill is all about doing the opposite to what your emotions and your body is telling you to do. So if you're feeling scared or anxious, the urge is to avoid. But I want you to approach that situation and throw yourself into it. When you're feeling depressed, the urge is to just sleep and isolate. But I want you to get up and be active and do something with your day. Because research shows that if we can consistently face our fears, we become less scared of them. And actually when we're feeling depressed, we can feel less depressed by getting up and doing something with our day. I've included an information sheet to talk about each of the different emotions and what their typical urge response might be, and also some examples of how you might act in the opposite way to each of those emotions. So take some time to have a read through this, and as always, I want you to practice this over the next week. The final managing distress skill is all about managing that really high level, intense distress. So I would imagine that most of you will have faced a situation where you felt so distressed, so upset or so anxious that you just couldn't think straight, that you couldn't remember any of your coping skills or anything that you've learnt in the past, or even just that nothing really worked because of the level of distress that you were in. So a lot of the skills that we've taught throughout this course have been more for that kind of day-to-day distress and those managing those negative emotions that we experience in day-to-day life. But these skills are all about that red zone of emotions where you're really highly aroused, really, really distressed, or maybe in a state of panic. The skills that I'm going to introduce you to this session are very fast acting, so they work very, very quickly, but they're not a long-term solution. So although they act very quickly, they only bring your arousal down for a short period of time. And the idea is that you use these skills in situations where you're highly, highly distressed to bring you down to a level where you're then able to think straight, where you're then able to remember some of the skills that we've taught about in this course. So before I go on to the skills, I just wanted to add a little disclaimer. So a lot of the skills that I've taught you throughout this course have been all about changing the way that you think and feel about difficult situations so that you can manage your emotions and manage your distress. However, when you're in a high level of distress or high level of arousal, sometimes we just have to bypass that and go straight to the body. So these skills are all about changing the body's chemistry to bring that arousal down, so essentially bringing down the body's response to distress. So before you practice any of these skills, I just want you to check that you are safe to do some of them, because some of them are about bringing your heart rate down quite quickly. Some of them involve things like exercise. So I just want you to take responsibility for making sure that you are medically able to use these skills and practice these skills. So the first skill is about changing your body temperature. So often what we tend to find is that if we're angry, if we're anxious, if we're stressed, if we're upset, we often get really hot and flustered. So this skill involves bringing the temperature of your body down. So if you're wearing layers, it might be that you take a jacket off, it might be that you step outside for some fresh air, it might be that you splash your face with some cold water. Just anything that's going to bring your body temperature down is going to bring that arousal down as well. You can also use temperature to activate something that's known as the dive reflex. So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because it's quite scientific, but essentially humans have a response where if we are submerged in cold water, our body very quickly brings our heart rate down, and it slows it down so much that it goes below our usual baseline. And this is essentially a survival technique. Now obviously I'm not going to get you to submerge your face in cold water, but there are ways that you can activate this dive reflex without having to do that. So essentially for this skill and to activate the dive reflex, you need to put something that's quite cold on this part of your face here, so where you can feel your cheekbones essentially. This can be anything cold, so it can be a cold bottle of water, a cold can of pop, some ice in a sandwich bag or wrapped up in a tea towel. Anything that's cold that you can just pop here on your face, so something that you can hold and pop there, is going to bring your heart rate down really, really quickly. So this is one that I definitely want you to check out with your doctor before you practice, but it can be really, really effective in bringing down that really high level of panic and distress. The second part of this skill involves using intense exercise. So as I've mentioned before, sometimes our emotions actually prepare our body for things. So when we're distressed or we're anxious, our body starts pumping adrenaline through our bodies so that we've got the energy and the strength to fight or to run away. So obviously when we're distressed and we've got all this adrenaline pumping through our bodies, it can be really difficult to almost manage that adrenaline. And this is where sometimes we do act on our urges because it's almost like we need to let this adrenaline out somehow. So exercise is a way that you can let that adrenaline out without acting on urges, without making the situation worse. So this skill involves essentially just releasing that adrenaline in some way. So again, I want to make sure that you're physically fit and medically fit to be able to use this. It might involve just doing some star jumps, running on the spot. If you're not as physically mobile, it might be that you really aggressively shake your arms. Just anything that is going to burn some energy, burn some of that adrenaline off is really going to be effective for this skill. The third part of this skill involves slowing down your breathing. So unfortunately, other than using the temperature skill where you can bring your heart rate down, we don't really have any other control over our heart rate. But what we do have control over is our breathing. And often what we find is that when we're distressed or anxious, is our breathing increases and it becomes quite irregular. So by controlling our breathing and slowing it down, we're not only bringing our breathing under control, but we're also slowing our heart rate down as well. So I've uploaded an information sheet that has a couple of breathing exercises that can be really, really effective in this type of situation. And again, this skill is just going to bring that distress down, bring that arousal down, just to a point where you can think clearer and then use some of the skills. And the final part of this skill is using muscle relaxation. So as I've already mentioned, when we're highly, highly distressed, our body is pumped full of adrenaline and we can feel really, really tense and tight. So this skill is all about releasing that tension and releasing that adrenaline. One way to do this is using progressive muscle relaxation. And this is all about working through the body and tensing each of the muscle groups, really holding that tension and feeling it, and then releasing it so that you're letting out that adrenaline and letting out that tension. So I've put a script up onto the Padlet and Facebook that helps you to work through this. It takes quite a bit of practice and to learn all of the different muscle groups and how to do it. So like I say, there's just a script that you can follow that's essentially instructions for how to use this skill. So those were the final skills of this wellbeing course. So we looked at how you can manage emotions by acting in the opposite way to how our feelings and our bodies are telling us to behave. And we've looked at how you can manage those really, really high levels of distress where some of the other skills might not work. So for the final part of this session, we're going to look at acceptance and how you can explore and understand how acceptance might be the best option for you in situations where you don't have any control. So when we're in a difficult situation, we actually have 5 options for how we can respond. So I'm going to introduce you to each of these and help you to explore what might be the best way to move forward for you, in the hope that this will help you develop acceptance for situations that feel out of your control. The first option is the really obvious one. So it's thinking about, can I solve this problem in any way? Do I have control over this situation? Is there anything that I can change? And if there is, that situation is very easily resolved by acting on that and solving the problem in the way that you've identified. So if you've fallen out with a friend, it might be that you choose to message them and apologise and try and make up with them. So the first option is just to see whether you can change the situation in any way for the better. The second option, if it feels like you can't make the situation better or change the situation in any way, is to change how you feel and think about the situation. So this is where some of your managing emotions and managing distress skills might come in. It might be that you choose to improve the moment in some way by using your improved skills. It might be that you choose to distract yourself and use some of the activities or contributing to make yourself feel better. But the second option is to essentially change the way that you think or feel about that particular situation. Our third option, if we don't feel in control, or if we choose not to improve the way we think or feel about the situation, It's just to stay miserable, dwell on the situation, cry about it, feel sorry for ourselves. But it's important that you consider what benefit that actually has. Is this an option that you want to go down when you're in a situation that you can't control? Our fourth option is to respond in a way that makes the situation worse in some way. So if we go back to the example of falling out with a friend, it might be that you act on your impulses or act on your urges and you send a really nasty and hurtful message. So I guess this is where this course has come in. This course has been about not choosing this option. It's been about having the skills to manage your emotions and manage distress without making the situation worse. But I guess it is one of those routes that we can take when we're in a difficult situation. So it's about exploring this option and thinking, do I actually want to make the situation worse? And our final option is to accept the situation. It's about looking at and acknowledging our alternatives and thinking about what's actually best for us. So almost going through that list and thinking, do I have control over the situation? Is there anything that I can change for the better? Can I solve the problem in any way? Can I change the way that I think and feel about the situation? Do I want to stay miserable about it? Do I want to dwell on it? Could I make the situation worse in any way, and do I actually want to do that? So acceptance is essentially about looking at your other options and acknowledging that acceptance might actually be the best option for you in that situation. Now, this isn't to say that it's easy. It's much easier said than done. And this is where a lot of the other skills come into play. So accepting situations that feel out of our control can feel really painful, can feel really distressing. And this is where it's important to use your other skills to manage that distress or manage the emotions that come with sitting with the acceptance. So acceptance is a choice. Like I say, it's about looking at your other options and choosing to make the one that's best for you. But it's a process. It's not about that one-time decision. It's about continually choosing to accept and live with that and manage the emotions that come with it. So I've uploaded a worksheet onto the Padlet and Facebook that outlines each of your options when you're in a difficult situation. It's a space for you to explore what each of those options might look like for you in that particular situation, and a space for you to explore what option you want to choose. So it might be that you choose to change the way that you think and feel, or it might be that you're in a situation where you have to just choose to accept it. But it just offers you the space to explore those options and for you to make that decision about what's best for you. So that brings us to the end of today's content and unfortunately the end of this course. So I just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you for watching the tutor videos, for accessing the information sheets and the worksheets, and for interacting on the Padlet and Facebook page. I've really enjoyed supporting you on this wellbeing journey, and I really hope that the information has been useful to you in some way. As I've mentioned time and time again, the purpose of these skills is to make sure that you're responding in a way that doesn't make the situation worse in any way. So actually, if you've been able to avoid using an unhelpful coping strategy at any point during this course, then it's worked, the skills have been useful for you, and I really hope that you can continue to use them going forward. On the Padlet and Facebook, there will be space for you to offer feedback for the course to let me know how you found it. There will also be some links about where you can go from here, so further community learning, and also some signposting of useful resources that are related to this course. So I just wanted to say once again, thank you so much for engaging in this course, and I really hope that you use the skills going forward and that it's been useful in some way. Good luck everybody, and goodbye.